Welcome to the FinLink Fincast, where we talk about everything wealth management, especially as it pertains to M&A. Here is your host, Xander Heinen.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the FinLink Fincast. Today we have a special Intel report. We are welcoming back Jack Devine from the Arkin Group, otherwise known as TAG. Jack is a 30-year CIA veteran and former head of worldwide operations. He founded the Arkin Group, which is a global risk and strategic intelligence consultancy serving multinational financial institutions, global law firms, Fortune 100 companies, and family offices in an effort to really reach out to our audience and the wealth management industry. Jack has created the 3+1 newsletter and podcast that comes out weekly. It really covers geopolitical topics and how they affect the wealth and asset management industries. Welcome, Jack.
That's good to be back again, Xander.
It's just always a pleasure having you on. You're a wealth of information, especially with what's going on in the world, this crazy world today. Jack, let's jump in. I guess the first topic, which is really garnering the most news coverage, is what's going on with the ceasefire in Gaza. Would love to hear your take on kind of the development since we last spoke. A lot of that obviously has to do with oil prices, and we'd love to hear what the ramifications in the financial markets may be from the current state of Gaza and Israel, Iran as well.
Xander, I think these are key questions. It's worth noting that, there's a lot of pundits that give you their best at wisdom. My wisdom, I believe, is strengthened because I've got people on the ground in all the countries we're talking about who actually are well wired into the system and its intelligence as I knew it back in the day, so to speak. So when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, I was hitting a positive note. In other words, if we look at what took place on October 7th, almost 2 years ago, Hamas brutally attacked Israel. At that time, Iran was a powerhouse and, had forces working with them in Syria, Lebanon, and the Hezbollah, Gaza, Hamas, the Yemenis, and their own capabilities. So, when that took place, it took a while for Israel to get going on Hamas, but because they had minimized, that's maybe not the had underestimated Hamas's intentions. But once they got squared away last September and putting Hamas on its back heels, then you saw the real Israeli intelligence service and its military force quickly push through Lebanon, almost completely anyway, demobilized it, right? It at the same time engaged Iran nose to nose and destroyed its air defenses and then fired at will. And basically, with our cooperation, eventually took a very heavy beating to the nuclear facilities there. And a gift from God was given because all of a sudden, Iran's main supporter, most important country in the Middle East for them was Syria. And Syria defected from them. And the radical leader decided he wanted to find accommodation with the West because he wanted to rebuild the economy. It was a tremendous blow to Israel. So Netanyahu, he's very controversial, as you know, both domestically and internationally. But I was fully supportive of what the Israelis were doing. I thought they had to have the pedal to the floor. They had to push back hard. And I think we take my hat off to how well that was done. Having said that, now, here we are a few weeks later, and I'm not feeling that same jazz as I was when we last spoke, because the ceasefire seems to be languishing, and certainly the deal with the Iranians, which there's only 60 days, the end of August, they have to work out the deal. And I stood back and I looked and said, why? What's going on here? Because when we were talking, I thought that the Iranians were putting economic recovery above nuclear. They were going to do a kabuki dance around the nuclear, but their real interest was to somehow get their economic base moving and to tranquilize its own population, which provided for us a unique opportunity to move move Iran in that direction. The same thing is true with the ceasefire in Hamas. I mean, I think Hamas was flat on its back and it was saying, okay, we will settle and let technocrats run. Now they're saying, oh, we feel a little more vigorous. Maybe we're not going to concede. The Iranians are starting to waffle a little bit internally. And I think, what was the reason? And I look at it, and again, the fellow that I gave very high marks to, I looked at Netanyahu and I said, sometimes you sit at the table and you have to know when to hold and when to fold, but you also have to know when basically you've gone as far as you can go and need to be practical about it. And this is where I question now his judgment. I'm going to give you a real punch here. It's right from the shoulder, and that is, I think Netanyahu really isn't that keen on having the peace as much as we are because he thinks there's more to squeeze out of the lemon. I think he's wrong. And if he is wrong, he runs the risk of having the ceasefire either languish further or that it be a temporary ceasefire where he feels he can go back and start fighting the next day. And on the case of Iran, he's working trying to undermine the government at the same time we're trying to get a peace deal. And if the Ayatollah has to have some maneuverability. So I'm sitting back and saying, I hope to God he's not thinking that he can undermine these two things and come out ahead. And there's two things that are very stunning to me. One is Syria is now moving in our camp. And again, I don't want to get into things that the folks don't know a lot about, but the Druze are a religious group, and half of them, not half, a large number of them are Israeli citizens, right, and supporters. And there was a kidnapping incident, and all of a sudden the Druze were being threatened. And how did Israel respond? They attacked Syria's military headquarters. Now, I would submit to you that if you want to make enemies with somebody, and they're trying to become friends and maybe even opened up relations, you smack them in the face at their military headquarters, you put in jeopardy this huge opportunity. So, long story short, I think we're going to get through it. I think we will get a deal in a ceasefire, maybe a little shaky with Hamas. And I do think we're going to find a deal with Iran, but it's going to be much more complicated than it needs to be. And this,
With all
again, I don't want to ramble on. I want to have you a spot here, but I want to address what are the economic implications of this.
Right.
So if you bear with me, I guess what I would say is if we are actually able to cut a deal with Iran, where they stop their nuclear development program. Deep down inside, the Ayatollah knows it's a fool's game to try and rebuild, right? He can rebuild. There's some enriched uranium is still left. But the minute he starts, we're going to blow it up. So where's that going, right? So in the meantime, you have a really bad situation where you need to improve your economy. And so you cut a deal with the U.S. Look, I'll do this. I'll put this great sacrifice and not go forward with my nuclear program. But I need relief on the sanctions. So if sanctions are lifted, that means 2 million barrels of Iranian oil is could be open on the market, right? That
Yeah,
2 million barrels a day is going to impact positively on oil prices, right? If the deal falls apart, in other words, again, I'm not going to put the responsibility totally on Netanyahu, but if it falls apart because the Iranians can't make their way to the table in the right way, then what we're going to look at is increased friction with Iran and oil prices and the straits, again, back in jeopardy. So again, most of your audience aren't playing long and short ball on the stability. But that's an important thing to keep in mind, that oil prices are still at flux, and that according to my reporting at this point, the the deal is in more jeopardy than I thought. But let's hang in. If I were an oil investor, I don't mean to make oil investment advice. I have to have a disclaimer immediately.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to get through it, and I think it may turn out to be quite positive.
So, Jack, now that we've discussed Iran and Israel and kind of how that is affecting oil prices, an interesting thing during the 12-day war with Israel and Iran, there was a lot of cyber warfare going on. I think Mossad and Israel were hacking into financial institutions, et cetera. So, I'd love to hear, how that affected the economy, what that looks like for the stability of financial institutions worldwide. Would love to hear your take.
It's interesting, Xander. This story, it's in the press. There's some coverage, but I would have thought it would be a big story because what they did, and you can think about, this is where when you go to the war, you show a lot of your capabilities, right? So when Iran challenged Israel, you now have to start showing your capabilities, such as with Hezbollah and the phones blowing up and multiple operations they had that the Iranians had no idea that they had capabilities. But
Pegasus.
this is in the financial is spectacular. They attacked the two biggest banks in Iran, the SEPTA Bank and the Melli Bank. And they went in and they went after the IRGC, that's the Revolutionary Guard that supports the Ayatollah. They went in and destroyed a lot of their accounts. There was a bank panic. People didn't see this. I don't know why it wasn't covered in Iran. People were going to the banks trying to get their money out. The stock market dropped 12%, right? So it was a very effective operation. And I think when you stand back and look at it, we have to realize that when confrontations start anywhere in the world, that countries now have such tremendous power to go into financial institutions, as much like many of our wealth management folks are sitting on financial institutions. And even though you have firewalls and this wall and that wall, the Israelis actually layered it. They kept firing. It was a series of attacks, well orchestrated. So what I'm saying is our own financial system and a confrontation is vulnerable. But there's investments in South America. There's investments all around the world, Asia, and looking at the Chinese, where it's worthwhile to step back once in a while and realize how bad things can get financially in a confrontation. So I think this provides another blue book for us. How oil markets are rocked on the one hand, now financial institutions are greatly undermined. And, we're looking at a part of the war. Not, we won't do this today, but even when you get to the Ukraine war, a war of drones and technology, a lot of cyber going on. And I think a lot of journalists probably aren't really steeped in cyber, so maybe they don't like the story, but there's a lot more to modern warfare than meets the eye. And so in this
Yeah.
case, financial institutions were exposed to be very vulnerable.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's just the technology is just getting more and more powerful and fascinating. It's horrifying at the same time. So we'll see how that plays out. Jack, I wanted to thank you for coming on today. We're going to disseminate this to our listeners. I really think that the 3+1 from Tag Intel with the new podcast is great. It's just, three salient points plus one, kind of off topic point. I get it. I love reading it every week, and the new podcast is great. When I don't have the time to open emails, I can just kind of turn it on and listen in the background. But we really want to thank you for coming on, and I'd love to have you for another podcast as things move quickly. I didn't want to get into anything with Ukraine or Thailand and Cambodia today, but we'll have that for another time.
Well, there's so much to deal with in this day and age, Xander. You and I are never going to be short of information that's relevant to your audience. Thank you.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you. Have a great one, Jack.